Well, thank you so much, alums, for joining us today for the Careers in Regulatory Affairs panel. I do have a few questions for you, but first wanted to start off with introductions so that our students get to know you, get to know about your roles. So who'd like to go first?
I can go first since I'm first in the alphabet. So hello, my name is Maria Catarello. I'm a senior manager in regulatory CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls at Novartis Gene Therapies. I graduated with a bachelor's in chemistry in 2013. I've held global regulatory roles at Baxter Healthcare and Novartis, and formerly of Axis, a gene therapy startup company. And I'm based in Chicago.
I'll go next. So my name is Eric Romano. I currently work for Diageo, and my previous employer was Cargill, where I worked in food safety and regulatory, but my current job is a regulatory affairs specialist, and I graduated in with a bachelor's in chemistry and a minor in food science in 2014. So mainly my job is to ensure the regulatory compliance or approval of alcohol through the government for the company.
And I guess I will go next since I'm the only one left. My name is Elizabeth Jones. I graduated in 2021 with a double major in chemistry and psychology, and I work as a regulatory affairs specialist at Cardinal Health, and I work in the medical device industry, specifically with PPE, specifically, again, surgical gloves, examination gloves.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for those introductions. So as we were talking about before with regulatory affairs, I feel like a lot of our students kind of don't know or don't realize what it is. So with respect to what each of you do, could you explain a little bit of what regulatory affairs kind of entails in your role specifically?
Sure, so I can go ahead and get started. So in the regulatory environment for drugs, there are different classifications of drugs. There are new approved drugs, biologics that are made from human-derived elements, and then generic drugs. There's also medical devices. And so some of the roles I've had and the one I currently have works in the CMC space, which is the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. So there are guidances and laws that govern the routine manufacturing, release, and quality control over drugs. And so in my current role, I work on a gene therapy product that's in its pivotal clinical trial, and that's a global product. So I work with the US FDA, the EU health authorities, Japan, and every country around the world has its own health authority. And I work as part of technical teams, including engineers, scientists, statisticians, clinicians, toxicologists, to basically put together submissions to these health authorities to allow clinical trials to start, answer any questions that they have, and really put Novartis in the best position possible to deliver these drugs as quickly as possible. For gene therapy, it's a really new and exciting field. So there's also a level of education with the health authorities to kind of teach them how our product works and make sure it's compliant. So I work with technical teams, clinicians, marketing. Really, it touches all aspects to make sure you can work through the regulatory system to make those drugs available. And so right now I'm working on a pivotal clinical trial to bring forth, hopefully in the commercial space soon.
I'll go next. So with my role, you can basically picture every single liquor on the store shelf. And my job is really to ensure that you as a consumer know what you are going to be buying. So I'm in charge of the whole labeling scheme, as well as through the product development, to ensure that whatever we're going to be labeling our product that's going to be on the store shelf is per the regulations. So there's regulations for how whiskey can be declared, how vodka can be declared, and what you can add to it and what's required on the label. So I basically am in charge of putting Diageo on the best footing to ensure that we're not misleading our consumers and well educating them on the responsibility of drinking alcohol.
Yes, so I work in the business unit RA. So we work specifically with US and European registrations and everything. We do have international and regional RA. Like Maria said, we have several people who work in Japan and Australia and Europe. Anyways, so right now I am in charge of advertising, labeling, and promotional material. So for medical devices, we have several different regulations, EU MDR, PPE regulations, and they all have to factor into the labeling. So it's been kind of a fun experience trying to understand a little bit more about the more technical side of the EU MDR and the PPE. I also help with submissions. So right now we're working on a couple different STEDs and also the UKCA certification. So I kind of get to jump on a bunch of different projects with the rest of my coworkers and learn a little bit about every different aspect.
Great to kind of get a deep dive into more into your roles. So can you tell me a little bit about how you think your degrees or how your education here at Illinois kind of shaped your role and helped you in your professional roles so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go on.
Okay. Yeah, I can go first. So first of all, having a chemistry degree is the right background for the job that I do. As a chemist, training in chemistry, I have to understand method development, manufacturing, testing, stability. And so having the scientific principles of chemistry and having hands-on lab experience helps me have discussions with the technical subject matter experts, where it's my responsibility to not just understand the job they're doing, such as method development, but also figure out if their method development is compliant to the most up-to-date global laws and regulations. So having a chemistry degree and coming to the table as another scientific person, you can't do this job unless you have a technical degree. So technically, this job is very applicable. The soft skills from U of I that helped me be successful is U of I is a big school, and I really had to learn how to advocate for myself and figure out the way I learn best. And in a large pharmaceutical company, I found that those skills have really helped me network with other people, ask the right questions, learn about cross-functional topics so that I can kind of bring it all together and put a holistic regulatory strategy together. And then I really appreciate working in a global company, and U of I has such a great global footprint. And so it really helps me work with my global counterparts I mentioned in the US and outside of the US. So my U of I degree really prepared me for the job I have.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Maria just said. Like I was basically almost going to say the same thing with regards to just in my role, whether or not it was with my previous employer or my current employer, my chemistry background gave me and prepared me with my analytical skills to think critically of what I do on a daily basis. I may not particularly apply every single chemical process from like physical chemistry or organic chemistry into my day-to-day job, like Maria, where she's working with different things on gene therapy and that kind of thing. But really what it comes down to is I have the analytical skills to contribute to our product development meetings, as well as have an analytical background to evaluate the regulations that are set forth for alcohol. And then exactly like what Maria said is U of I is such a large school. We understand already going to it that you need to advocate for yourself. So providing those soft skills to then go into a meeting and voice your opinion, so then you can advocate for yourself and what you believe to get the product to the end goal is something that you kind of learn through college as well. High school, it's like you basically are always kind of spoon-fed something where there's a one-on-one teacher interaction. Within the University of Illinois, we kind of have bigger classes that we have to advocate for ourselves. So soft skills and analytical skills have definitely, through this degree, helped me prepare for just my career in general.
Yes, I'm in the same boat as both of them. The analytical and critical thinking skills have definitely helped me whenever I interact with R&D, and the soft skills that I learned, in some of the different roles I had at U of I helped me kind of transition that conversation into conversations with marketing about, advertising and labeling. So having to balance, how technical to get with which team member or which SME you're talking to is definitely very important. And yeah, soft skills for me were one of the largest things, because being able to have good working relationships has helped me, expedite different projects we're working on, and also helps if you have to have a quick turnaround.
Yeah, it's not to say really necessarily that like we're advocating that everyone needs to be an extrovert. Introverts and extroverts all can work functionally through the regulatory affairs department. It's just really the fact that no matter who you are or whatever you believe, like to have those soft skills to always advocate for yourself in whatever form or fashion is just a skill that you kind of have to always learn in the adult world.
And I think regulatory, I can speak for myself on gene therapy, is emerging, and there may not be a precedent. And so I definitely am very comfortable working in a high visibility, high stress, ever changing, there's no like blueprint. And I got those skills from U of I the way that, my Orgo 2 tests were, where, hey, I made this molecule yesterday, how did I do it? And so like, I'm really comfortable living in that space. And that definitely came from U of I, developing those like creative, critical thinking skills. But like Eric said, being guided by your analytical education that you have to help you make sound scientific decisions, but being comfortable operating in like a gray space, like kind of focused on your core scientific principles.
Yeah, and like recruiters within regulatory affairs, they don't necessarily need you to be an expert in regulatory affairs. So it's really like when you go into that interview for a regulatory affairs job, they want to understand how do you critically think and how do you apply that analytical background that you got from the University of Illinois to the degree. And like the best thing that you can do is just always in an interview provide examples on how you did that. Even if like clearly being in college right now, you don't have work experience, you may have an internship experience, but even you can just like literally say like how you applied something from a class to be a real life example, because those are the kind of skills that I know Patricia and Jennifer, like you are teaching your students with through the career centers, is those soft skills too, because interviews can be very intimidating, but they can look beyond just the resume. You shouldn't always just focus solely on the resume. It's like, how can you apply your real life examples into an interview to then get you to open up the door to a job?
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And also, like when you're interviewing for positions, you'll need to answer some scenario-based questions, those behavioral questions. And if you're not being involved in extracurriculars, leadership roles, you won't necessarily even have those stories to tell. You might develop your foundational academic skills through your classes and courses, but some of those stories might not always evolve from coursework or course-related things. So absolutely.
Yeah.
So what exactly, kind of thinking back when you were a student or even thinking right now, what do you think drew you to this role or to the world of regulatory affairs?
I'll go first because like I initially was a bachelor's of science chemistry major and I was on the pre-med track. And while I was going through the pre-med track, my sophomore year, I was talking with my advisor, and the fact that it might be a strong suit just to branch out from your chemistry degree and pre-med track to take a human nutrition class. And so I took the intro level food science and human nutrition class, Fission 101. And I found that I was so interested in the food science and human nutrition aspect that it kind of like just clicked. I thought like, oh, I always wanted to be a doctor, but like you don't know until like you actually like have that aha moment. And that class was that aha moment for me that I decided to drop the pre-med track and go with chemistry and food science. And during that class specifically, I was always interested in, okay, we have food and alcohol and drugs and all that kind of thing. And we have guidelines on how they're manufactured, how they are labeled and whatnot. And here in a class, like we're teaching you like, how do you label X food, blah, 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 blah. I wanted to know further on the why. And the why is the regulation. The regulation is basically the guidebook on like, here's the justification from a political standpoint, a scientific standpoint on why we are declaring X to be labeled as such. And when I started my career in Cargill, while I didn't have a regulatory job, I was in the food safety division. And basically, for those of you that don't know or do know, the Food Drug Cosmetic Act has two basically points to that law. It's one, making sure that food is safe, and two, that you're not misleading the consumer. So while I was working on the food safety part, I wanted to also branch out and go into like the misleading part, where I want to ensure that I'm never going to be misleading our consumers through our regulatory labeling or that kind of thing. And so I wanted to emphasize on that point. And so I did extracurriculars. I did other things within my job, as well as just on the side within my undergrad degree, to get as much experience as possible. Kind of like what we were saying earlier, at Illinois, as well as in the real world, you're going to have to advocate for yourself. So if you can't expect something to be handed to you. So I went and did it myself, and it landed me to here.
So I guess I have two ways that I got into regulatory. So my first job out of college, so I was aware of regulatory as a field. I have family members that are in the pharmaceutical industry, so I was aware it was like a job. I applied for R&D jobs out of school, and I interviewed at Carey Flavors and Ingredients, and just interviewed as a regular chemist. And they said, you know what, we think you'd be a better fit for regulatory affairs. And I thought, oh, I didn't realize this was going to happen so soon. I didn't realize that someone was going to say that. And so I really just like was open to the opportunity. And so I took the job, and I enjoyed regulatory. I think that I really like combining my scientific background with kind of like reading and larger, bigger picture, big idea strategies. And so for me, being in the lab wasn't the best use of my skill set. And so I was looking for an opportunity to combine more of this like public speaking, large strategies, but I always wanted to still be involved in the technical aspects. After about a year there, I became aware of a job that opened at Baxter Healthcare. I'm going to be honest, guys, I interviewed 3 times, and by the 3rd time, I finally got a job there. So on the like discussion about advocating for yourself, like if you want something, you're gonna have to kind of keep going for it until you get it. And so I got into Baxter, and it was really just a good fit. On a personal note, my mom had cancer when I was younger. She's fine now, which is great. And then some of my family members work in pharmaceuticals. So for me, it's a no-brainer for me to work at a pharmaceutical company. I really like working on a product that I know is there when people need it the most, and knowing they're getting a high quality, safe, and efficacious product. So for me, it's kind of like, pun intended, I guess, in my DNA, that like this is something I would want to do, and I feel very motivated to do it. And I'm lucky it all worked out. So a little bit of luck being there in the right place at the right time, and persistence.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same. I'm very lucky to have the role I have. I'm very surprised that I got it. I wasn't planning to work in regulatory for a couple of years because I didn't know I would be able to get a position. But I was first introduced to it by Patricia. I had a meeting with her talking about different careers and what to do with my life. I wasn't sure what to do with a chemistry degree because I do not like working in a lab. I've never liked working in the lab. So I had to kind of figure out what can I do to combine like the soft psychology skills I have and the analytical, conceptual, big picture chemistry skills I have. And she was like, have you ever heard of regulatory affairs? And that was the first introduction. I did my own research and I started looking at different career paths to try to get into it. Luckily, I got the position I have. So that's kind of how I got introduced to it.
Awesome. That's all sounds so inspiring. How you each got into your role and got introduced to the field. So kind of thinking also at a smaller level, you talked about working on different teams, working in with different types of people, but what does a day-to-day life or day-to-day of your role kind of look like?
So I can go ahead if you want. So I work for a company that's primarily headquartered in Switzerland and then on the East Coast. So I am up at the crack of dawn at 7, starting my meetings with my international counterparts. And I bring that up because one of the things I really enjoy about my job is the international global aspect. I really like working with global colleagues. People really bring unique perspectives on science, on healthcare, on level of risk that's acceptable, people's different experiences. So I always really like working in a diverse company. So that's why I bring that up. So a typical day starts with, I might be in regulatory team meetings. So there's a larger regulatory group. Some are focused on labeling, like what Elizabeth described. Some of my colleagues are focused on clinical trial setup, maybe pharmacology, toxicology, and then I'm a team member on the chemistry side, working on the testing and manufacture of the drugs. So we might have team meetings developing overarching regulatory strategies of how we plan to get a commercial drug approved by FDA, Europe, Japan. I will also have meetings with technical SMEs one-on-one. So I might call the lead scientist. I might have a call with the lead engineer, discuss some of their manufacturing problems, some of the changes they want to make, give them regulatory advice on what type of reporting we would need to do globally, what kind of changes they can make that maybe wouldn't be reportable, is there impact to the safety or the efficacy of the product. And then also at this point in my career now, I'm doing some mentoring of junior associates, which I think is like something that is unique that you can do with regulatory as well, is, you know, working with new hires to kind of help them understand different aspects of regulatory and put them on different projects. So there's starting to be like a people management aspect as well. So managing one specific product and making sure that's compliant, taking it through the challenges where they're technical, manufacturing, and then also people management as well. So that's kind of, I guess, the short answer.
A day-to-day job for me really entails with ensuring regulatory compliance of every product that we are going to put out the door. So really, we understand that like Ketel One vodka, like it's set in stone. We understand that Bailey's is set in stone, but the thing that grows our business is new ventures and new capital and new products. So whenever our R&D and innovation team comes up with a new product, I'm starting at the beginning with them to ensure that we are putting in the right ingredients to be able to declare as XYZ, or how it should be labeled from the get-go. So I'm in charge of reviewing graphics on how they are labeled and how everything is in the right place and that kind of thing. So really on a day-to-day job, like I'm in a lot of project calls to ensure that each project is moving according to the plan. So like think of it as a bus. A bus is going from A to B, and it's picking up all these different people from R&D, from graphics, from packaging, from regulatory, from the quality team. Everyone is getting on the bus at certain times within that A to B route, and our project managers are basically in charge of driving that bus. So I'm basically a passenger on that bus, collaborating with every one of these people on that team for that product, and then ensuring the regulatory compliance with regard to labeling and the state of identity and everything like that. Another thing that I'm currently working on is the fact that Diageo, we all know, is an alcohol company, but there is a trending market right now, or a trending topic of the non-alcoholic market. So currently, alcohol is regulated by the TTB. This was done during the Prohibition era. So it is entirely separate than FDA, which is food. So with this acquisition of going into the non-alcoholic space, I'm utilizing my FDA food knowledge from my previous employer to help implement a process of effectively getting into the non-alcoholic market. So that would be entirely regulated by the FDA. So now my job will be to work with 2 government agencies instead of just one, and ensuring that we have a streamlined process of how to approve things, because we've been doing alcohol for now a long time. So we have our processes down pat, but with this new market that we're going into, we have to ensure that we're meeting the regulatory compliance of that government agency as well. So with my previous employer, I'm utilizing that skill set as well as my education from Illinois to help create that process for the non-alcoholic division of our business.
Yeah, similar to Maria, I work on an international team. 2 of our coworkers are actually in Singapore, so we get to have really early meetings, or we get to have really late night meetings. So schedule kind of shifts and changes depending on what project we're doing. But we have bigger meetings with cross-functional teams, R&D, marketing, sterilization, biocompatibility, because we've been working on the MDR transition. So we all have to come together and work on the STED document in order to submit it by the timeline. And then additionally, if I'm working on something like a labeling project, then I'll be on calls with marketing and labeling, trying to balance our priorities, explain what we're doing, explain why we're changing it, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we don't have to, go back and fix anything in case someone wasn't aligned with our priorities. And then since I'm earlier on in my career, I also spend a lot of time, researching and reading my own, guidance documents. I read the CFR, I read the MDR, I read the UKCA, UKRP information. So yeah, a lot of it is learning on the job constantly.
So we have a question in the chat from Sydney. I was just wondering what a long-term career looks like in regulatory affairs. For example, is this a role that you would go into directly after graduating, or what would the early steps look like? Also, are there goals of other things you want to do within regulatory affairs later in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. The world of regulatory affairs is ever evolving. You may not know this now through like your coursework, but within the political nature of like regulations itself, there's a cycle in how laws are created. You create the regulation, you test it out. It always, and this is the wrong word to say, but they always say it fails because there's some nuance that doesn't capture everything that you need, or we discover something through science later that we need to include it into the regulation to amend it. And then you put it to the market, and then it keeps on going around. So it goes around and around in a circle that with the current regulations that we have right now, 10 years down the line, there could be a different instance of how things need to be labeled or what needs to be added to products, or consumers can basically advocate for different things, like for the food industry or just like the alcohol industry entirely. Like non-GMO was a thing that was just not discovered, but like consumers cared about knowing whether or not there are GMOs in their product, that regulations then became into effect and cycled through that whole regulatory process to implement into the food industry, alcohol industry, and so on and so forth. So long-term regulatory affairs, if you wanted to stay in this kind of job, you could do it throughout your lifetime or your career, because there will be always something new that comes up, either whether it's driven by political nature, science, consumers, you name it. So it's definitely an interesting job on a day-to-day basis because of that. And going into your question, or the question of, can you go into this directly after graduating or in a stepping stone? I think the three of us will all agree that there is no right way to do it. It's just the fact that if you want to go into regulatory affairs or it's of interest to you, it doesn't hurt to apply, because a lot of the things that you learn in your degree at Illinois, while they may not particularly be applicable in the job, that analytical background that you gain through this degree will help you succeed later down in the career. So if there's stepping stones where, like, say, like the food industry, and you can't get into regulatory affairs right now, go into that food industry and get industry experience of what you want of the FDA. And then if a job opens up at a company 2 or 3 years down the line, and you apply for it and get it, like, it's because you got that background knowledge of the food industry or the drug industry or whatnot. But you can also apply to it right after college. Like, this degree definitely sets you up for success in doing either which you want to do.
Yeah, so I guess I think I am the example of this question, Sydney. So I applied originally for an R&D job at Carrie Flavors and Ingredients. I'm not sure if you're on the call, and they were like, we think you'd be a good fit for regulatory. So all of my work experience post graduation has been in regulatory. You can definitely apply for an associate regulatory. So you're looking for like an associate level job in regulatory with 0 to 2 years of experience. You can definitely try to apply right out of school. Some places may want you to have some sort of work experience. So in the lab, mostly people who transition, at least the people I work with, have worked in some technical aspect first, and then they transition to regulatory later. But I also work with people who started right out of school, whatever the series of events was. So you can apply for an associate level position right out of school. As far as what does your career trajectory look like? So here at Novartis, there are like hundreds of people in a regulatory department. There are like hundreds of people all over the world. So like large pharmaceutical companies have entire departments. There are different aspects of regulatory. There's labeling, there's what I work in, the CMC space, chemistry, manufacturing controls. There's device, there's generics, there's biologics, gene therapy. There are so many opportunities in regulatory. And in my experience, I have gained all of my experience through the School of Hard Knocks. So through work experience. And so I got this advice from actually a friend's mom that, like, in your 20s, look for opportunities where you can something you're interested in and you think you can contribute in, but you're also going to like make yourself a little bit scared, like something that you're not very good at maybe, and keep moving from thing to thing. And that will help you figure out what department to be in. So I wouldn't focus so much on like the job title. I would look at what are the skills and the jobs, like what are the job responsibilities? And is this something you want to do? And you kind of build a toolbox. And then when you get to where I'm at, you then kind of assess that toolbox. And now you're like, okay, now I'm ready to manage products or people based on the experience I got in my 20s, kind of, follow your bliss, like following the scientific areas you were interested in learning more about. So I would approach, if you're interested in being in regulatory, I would look at associate level jobs that are 0 to 2 years of experience. And I would be looking at the company description of what they do and kind of the job responsibilities, and see if it's something you're interested in learning. Because although your chemistry degree will help guide you in the scientific principles, it's not going to be a 1-to-1 ratio of applicable skill sets. So you're going to have to do some like learning and not hard work, but like some learning and hard work. So what do you want to learn about, and kind of just navigate through that. And you can definitely have a lifelong career in regulatory.
Yeah, so I started in regulatory right out of college, but it was never what I had expected to do. I thought it would be a few stepping stones before I did that. So while I was still applying for jobs and everything, I was looking at different regulated industries. And then I was applying for, quality roles, clinical research assistant, clinical research coordinator, anything to kind of get my foot in the door. And in that process, I didn't have any of the normal technical interviews. So I had to work on figuring out how to make all of my people skills or leadership skills transferable. And I also, tried to do a little bit of free education. So I got like a good clinical practices, like a certificate from like some online website, but it was completely free. And, I still mentioned it in the interview because it shows that you have that interest and that dedication to, teach yourself how to do something and that you are a reliable person who can help their regulatory department.
Awesome. Thank you all for those thoughtful answers. I have another question for you all. So kind of thinking back to your time as undergraduates, was there, some of you mentioned this before about having internship experiences. So what type of internship or co-op, if you've had those experiences, have you had that you think have kind of also prepared you for your roles?
So I interned at an adhesive company in like material science, kind of like more of a mathsy, like kind of a material science and engineering type of experience. And then I worked for 3.5 years in Professor Andrew Gewert's lab. Shout out to Professor Gewert, he's a very nice guy. And I wrote an undergrad thesis on lithium-ion batteries. And then I also was part of a publication as well. Now, you will notice that has nothing to do with pharmaceuticals, but I'm glad I got that experience because I got hands-on lab experience through my undergrad research and my internship. I got a exposure to manufacturing, like on the floor. I worked in a pilot plant, formulation development, so that was good. And then I also, working with the grad students a lot too through undergrad research, helped me develop scientific minds, scientific thinking. And so even though my technical experience is not related to drug development, all of the skill sets that I learned are like applicable. So yeah, all of my stuff's in mathsy and lithium-ion batteries. So yeah.
I interned with actually my former employer. So I had an internship with Cargill in between my junior and senior year, and they offered me a full-time job after that. But I think the biggest thing that I got from that internship experience was two things. One, the job itself, but two, I had that security under my belt going into my senior year of having the job. And I actually still interviewed for other jobs, even though I knew I had a job lined up with Cargill. And that being said, your internship experience gives you that work accreditation as well as work experience to basically go into your senior year and say, I have work experience that I've applied my degree for through XYZ examples. I don't know if this was before the recording or during, but basically you're like in your resume building skills as well as your interviews, you want to be able to apply your degree in real life examples. And internships are a great way, as well as laboratory experience or whatever you can do extracurricular wise to give yourself the advantage of applying what you've learned through your degree in the real world, because employers are going to be looking for that entirely in the interview process as well as in your day-to-day job.
Yes, so I kind of had a different, trajectory, especially with COVID. It kind of derailed a lot of my plans. So I kind of had to adapt and figure out how do I get this work experience if I can't really find the summer internships. So I'm going to plug a few things. Number one, the Atlas program done through the School of LAS. I used that to get a data systems internship, which gave me a few more technical skills than I had. I did that my last semester. I worked as an LAS 102 transfer advantage intern. So I was a transfer student, but if you're just a normal student, you can do the 101 internship. That is a really good way to learn a lot of skills and leadership. It's a very important characteristic that people will look for, especially in younger candidates. And it's something that I utilize all the time in my interviews. Another thing that I actually did was I was risk management chair for my sorority, free plug AOE. Yeah, and a big part of regulatory is risk benefit analysis and risk management. And while it's not the same, technical kind of risk, it still gives you that exposure and that experience on, how to balance the risk. I think that was all of my positions. Oh, wait, no, I was an SCS peer advisor. I'm sorry, Jennifer.
Yes, you were an SCS peer advisor and an amazing one. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yes, so I was an SCS peer advisor my last year at school. And so I worked with a couple different, chemistry, chemi majors. We put together workshops. We would do like panels for new or prospective students. We would write blog posts. We would do a lot of stuff to interact with the students. And like I said, having that both peer mentorship and peer leadership experience is very valuable. And it's definitely helped me, especially because, so the way my team had evolved, I got trained by one person who switched departments. And then after I started, like 3 months later, we had 5 new people. And it was my responsibility to, kind of help them get, situated and onboarded. So having that peer experience definitely helped me because they have so many more years of experience than me, and it can be very intimidating. But being able to still show that you have the confidence in your own skills and abilities definitely helped me have a smooth transition with my team.
So just a couple more questions that I wanted to ask. So what do you think is the most rewarding part of each of your jobs?
I have an easy one. I mean, the product I work on is Zolgensma. You can look it up. It's basically a life-saving treatment for a rare pediatric disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And it is a disease that, if left untreated, children die. And so it's extremely rewarding to see children whose lives may not have continued on if they didn't have access to the treatment. And so, it's really easy for me to see the patients that are directly impacted. And one of the challenging things when I joined Avexis, which at that time was a biotech startup, I was the second person in the department. And so it was very difficult, and I had to be very creative, and it was very agile and fast. And so it definitely makes all the long hours and the stress or whatever worth it, because I know I directly helped impact patient lives. And so I mean, I'm very personally motivated to work at a pharmaceutical company. Particularly this product was really a once in a career opportunity.
Yeah, I have similar reasoning. So I work with medical devices, but especially with the COVID pandemic, we've been very busy because medical gloves are considered PPE. So, we've kind of had to be running at 100 the entire time, but knowing that it's that important to try to avoid the shortages and try to make sure that the different countries have the supplies they need is very motivating. And even just being able to see it, I'll go to my dentist or my doctor and I'll see the product I work on, even on like TV shows like Grey's Anatomy. In the background, I can see the products I work on. So, being able to see that it actually does make a difference definitely helps keep me motivated.
Yeah, and kind of going into what Elizabeth said is just more so to the degree, like I don't work in the drug manufacturing experience, so I don't have a direct impact like Maria was saying. That's really cool that you had that experience. But for me, what gets me through the day, as well as like every day with the products that I'm working on or the long hours, is going into the grocery store and seeing the product that I worked months on that shelf. Like, I'm currently new in my role right now, and I've had already direct impacts within the company for the past 4 months, but my first project where I had like beginning to end manufacturing of the product itself is going to launch in July, and I, for one, am so excited to see it on the shelf when when it does come out. So that will be just really a cool experience to keep me going.
So that's so great. It's always nice to have that direct impact or that tangible effect of the work that you do. So great. So lastly, what advice would you have for current students, undergraduate students who are just starting off their career exploration process? Something that maybe you didn't think about when you were an undergrad, or any advice for them?
So I think it's okay to not know what you want to do. Like, remove that pressure. No one, maybe I'm wrong. No one at 22 has their whole life figured out, and no, you don't even know yet. So, eat the elephant piece by piece, as they say. Just look at it step by step. Look at the job description, see what you're interested in, and just kind of build your toolbox. And so, what is something you're interested in learning about? Maybe it's drug development. That's what I work in. Drug development, and what kind of skills can you learn in this job? And what are you maybe kind of good at? Maybe your verbal communication is something you're good at, but you're not so strong on drug development because you just haven't learned about it yet. So keep putting yourself in situations where you can shine with some of the things you're good at, but also push yourself outside of your comfort zone and learn something new. And so you can definitely apply for associate jobs for regulatory. But I would say, when I was, coming out of school, I thought I was going to have it all figured out. Every year that passes by, it's more and more hilarious because the learning never stops. Like, you always keep growing and learning. So just like take that pressure off yourself and just piece by piece, what's something you're interested in learning in, where you can, contribute to a team, but also push yourself outside your comfort zone a little bit. It's a little more pie in the sky advice, I guess.
Yeah, I would entirely agree with what she just said. Like, going into your senior year or going out of your senior year, you won't have everything figured out. Like, that's the point of a career. It's kind of, you constantly learn throughout your entire career itself, and you should honestly be, when you're looking at jobs, be motivated to apply to that company or apply to that job. So reading the job description, and as well as researching the company, that is something that I highly advise going into. Is the job may seem great, or the job description, but if you do not feel like you are going to add value to that company, or they're not going to listen to you, that's not worth applying to that company. But within the career space itself, is you're always constantly going to be learning. So you have to be motivated to do what you want to do. And one day it could be this, and the next day it can be another thing. But the thing is, like what Maria says, to embrace that uncomfortability, because that uncomfortability will then make you constantly learn. And that will then be able to give you real life examples that you can put into what you're doing currently right now. Or if you have a target of going into regulatory affairs and then you want to transition to something else, doing that will give you that experience to then for that next job or whatever you want to do. So really advocate for yourself and embrace the uncomfortability, because you're going to constantly learn. And then I think really from an interview skill that I didn't really know until being in the real world is research the company fully. Like, if you're going to be starting off at X employer and then you want to transition to a new one without internally promoting yourself, you have to know it really, that employer. Like, you have to advocate for yourself, but you almost have to brag about your future employer as well. And recruiters will definitely be impressed with the research that you put into initiatives that the company itself are doing. So, because they know then that you care about their company as well as you care about the job itself. So yeah, that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I can give you.
Yeah, so I would say definitely focus on making sure any skill you get would be transferable, and how to practice, talking about that in an interview. And then in general, I was very interested in drug development and discovery. There is a chemistry class for that. I don't remember the number or the name, but Jennifer can probably tell you. And that definitely, you know, taught me some of the basics of just how the manufacturing process works. And while it's still different for medical device, it's still, you know, is applicable in several ways. Another thing I would definitely recommend is the career exploration sessions. My last year, I had so many appointments with Jennifer and Patricia trying to figure out, you know, how to do interviews, how to write cover letters, how to fix my resume, how to act like, you know, well over the, you know, in remote interviews, because everything I do is remote and it's different because you don't necessarily have the same body language or face-to-face interactions. So yeah, I would definitely utilize SCS Career Services, utilize everything they have. There's so many resources, so take advantage of it.
And I'll go off of that point a little bit too. Is when I was in at Illinois, I was a resume editor, and one of the big critical things that I could give any undergraduate or just anyone in general when I'm reviewing a resume is you shouldn't have just one resume, or you shouldn't just have one cover letter. Every single resume that you have, you can have it as like a template, but then when you apply to a job, your resume should almost be every single critical piece that you want to check off for that job. So you should always constantly be editing your resume and your cover letters to exemplify the traits and the responsibilities that that job is specifically asking for. So that's something that I've seen a lot when I was definitely an undergrad, when I was reviewing resumes, is that they were going to apply to 10 different jobs with the same resume, but then the 10 different jobs weren't the same, so it wasn't really applicable itself. So my advice for resume building and whatnot is build your resume, but that's a template. You can always understand like the first 2 bullets of whatever experience are the most important, but if you have 4 bullets itself, remove the last 2 bullets and that's something more applicable to the job that you're applying to.
That's good advice there. Sometimes when I've applied to jobs, there are 3 different versions of Maria Cattarello that exist. And it's like, and that's why I say it's so important to look at the job description and look at the skills, because you're retrofitting your resume to fit that job description. And if it doesn't, think about, you know, what, you know, analytical soft skills, how are you really are selling yourself. You really are selling yourself. And there's different versions of you to get different jobs, and that's all just part of it.
And I mean, like the interview process and the resume process itself is you're advocating for yourself, but you're going to be doing that in your job too. So like it's always on a constant basis. And so definitely like never not advocate for yourself. And I think like we all understand going to a Big 10 university that the soft skills itself for advocating yourself, you have to do that to succeed at Illinois. So I think it really sets us up for success in our careers as well. So just don't forget about that though.
Absolutely. I totally agree with all of the things that you said here. Tailoring your application materials to job descriptions, so important. You really want to mirror what the company is looking for and demonstrate the skills that you have that fit what they're looking for. And also kind of to Eric's point, as you mentioned, having those different versions as well. So yeah, those are kind of all the questions that I had for you. Any final thoughts that you want to share or anything at all?
No, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I think that, you know, we talked about it earlier. I don't think people know what regulatory is until you get out into the world. So I'm on LinkedIn if you want to find me and message, because creating your network, particularly coming from a Big 10 school, that's part of, you know, how you get jobs. That's the fact of life. So yeah, just I'm sure if you're watching this, then you're on the right track because you're thinking about what to do after school. So
I would definitely agree what Maria just said. Like advocating for yourself is one thing, but also networking is another thing. Like sometimes when you just literally see University of Illinois on that resume, a recruiter who also went there is going to be like, all right, I'm gonna open that door a little further for this interviewee. So don't hesitate in reaching out to me. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And if you have any questions with regards to the food industry or the alcohol industry, or just regulatory affairs in general, like please reach out, because like what Maria said, like you logging into this video and watching this video is the step that you need, is another step that you can take to help you progress in that big step after graduation into your career.
Mhm. Yeah, one last thought I had is also just in general, I have seen internships for regulatory affairs in the summer. So be on the lookout for those. You know, I didn't really think about the internship opportunity existing. You know, there's R&D, there's everything else, but there are regulatory affairs opportunities. And I'm also on LinkedIn, so.
Well, all right. Thank you so much. And just kind of lastly, what Eric mentioned, right? Embracing that uncomfortableness, if that's a word, but reaching out and building your network and learning and even watching this session should be kind of, the students should be giving themselves a pat in the back because they're making a step towards the right direction. So awesome. Thank you so much again, alums, for your valuable time, volunteering time out of your busy schedules to talk to our students, sharing your insights about the world of regulatory affairs and talking to us about your career paths. I'm certain anyone who's watching this will really benefit from learning more about this, but thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having
Of course.
us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
You again.
Yes, and also if you haven't sent me your mailing address, I would really love to send you a thank you note, so please do so if you haven't done that already. All right, well, thank you again, and that's it from me, but have a good rest of your day.
Thank
You as
you.
well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.